All good. Hey everybody, we're gonna get started here in just a minute. Ryan had a little issue with the computer, so we're just gonna have some hold music and hang out for a bit. While we wait. Hope you're having a good night. Got some new sound effects too. Gonna play around with those tonight. Think you all like it. I'm gonna be silly with that all night long. All night long. There we go. Here comes Ryan. Boom. There he is. Excellent.
Hey, I'm here.
Awesome.
Sorry about that.
It's all good. It is all good. I was just checking all the feeds to make sure everything's up and running properly.
Oh, good deal.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. It has been a week. Like so many things have been happening. And good things. Definitely good things. At least for
that's good.
For what we do.
Now, I could be wrong about this, but it was looking like Ryson, your son, on Instagram, I could be wrong about this, he already published author.
Yes.
It looks like he is already experimenting with his next book.
Number 3 comes out, is it April? April,
Hey.
it's like the end of April. Book number 3 comes out. Yeah, actually, wife just talked to the editor and publisher today, and they got the art, or she has the art, and she just needs to put them all together, and I think we will have the digital copy, the first digital copy pretty soon, and then shortly after, like within a couple of weeks, we should have like actual hard copies we can use for promo things. But yeah, get ready for the third book to come out, which is completely wild. And hopefully that means we can start doing some things like she can start doing some. She can, not me. She'll be doing some things like gift sets, and things for like the holidays. Hey, get all 3 books together for this. She's got plans for stickers and all kinds of cool stuff. So yeah, it's wild. My son totally doesn't want to have anything to do with it anymore. Like, he's the creative director, and he'll give some ideas. And then my wife's like, "Oh, I want to do photos and stuff with you." And he's like, "No, I don't want to do any of that stuff." It's okay. He's 6, so I mean, what do you expect?
That he's doing so much in developing the stories, and yeah, it's just really cool. Like, I wish we could see more kids doing that. Like, I wish there were even more stories that were kid generated like that. Yeah,
it's really cool. The whole backstory about how it even got started, like how it even came to be, is just super cool. Like, it's my dad. I think I told this story before, but I mean, it's not exactly cool because it involved my dad getting hurt, but he's totally fine. He was on my family lives in Long Beach, California, SoCal. And my dad was out for a bike ride one day along one of the riverbeds that are pretty common all over SoCal. And his friends aren't sure what happened, but he fell off his bike, fell in the water, he was underwater for a moment or two. And so they had to get him to the hospital. He was intubated for a bit. He was there for about 2 days, and then he was fine. Went home, no problem at all. But while we were there, we drove down to go visit, make sure he's doing okay. And my son has cystic fibrosis, so he can't go into hospitals. Other than his hospital, going into hospitals is not a safe thing for him to do. And so my wife and him would go down to the beach and kind of wander around while I was inside with my family seeing my dad. And at one point, he was just kind of, imagination was kind of going wild and hanging out inside the car. And my wife's like, "All right, whatever, I'm just going to let him do his thing in the car seat, and she'll play or do some stuff on her phone." And he started just talking about a surfing spider. And he was just talking, and she's like, "Wait, what is he talking about?" And so she's like, "Hang on," pulled over her camera and just kind of like held it up so that she could record him. And he just went off on like a story for like 15 minutes. And she's like, "Oh man, that'd be super fun to do something with." And like a year or so later, she's like, "Maybe I should write a book about this." And she went back to the video, and sure enough, he had said most everything necessary to make it an actual story. She had to clean up a few things and like all that, but yeah, he 100% came up with the idea of the surfing spider who rubbed its own belly to comfort itself and ate ice cream. And so that's what created Randall the Blue Spider, and it's just kind of gone on from there.
Yeah, it's such a great idea, and my audio. I hate to say this because if I was smiling at a part of that story that I wasn't intending to, my audio went out, and I was like, oh no, but I heard like but in all honesty, like I heard the entire part of like how it's funny because I think any parent knows of that moment where your kid is like sitting in the back of the car or really anywhere, and they're just inventing this whole world. And I just like that it's a very like it's a very accessible story for kids. I like how it deals with anxiety, which I feel like most people, if not all people, have. And I really like it. I'm so it's so great that your son and your wife and your whole family have been able to build this story. And yeah, book 3 coming out. So I saw that on Instagram and I thought that was so cool.
Yeah, thanks, man. It's pretty rad. It's pretty surreal that my son and my wife are already published authors. My wife she's gonna take a little bit of a pause, I think, after this to finish her book because she's got a marketing book she's working on right now. But yeah, it's really awesome to see this come to fruition. It's pretty cool.
Oh, right on. Good deal.
We've already got some folks joining us today too. So we've got Rich is here. You can see it in the comments there on YouTube, and Robert's here too, which is awesome. And then my buddy,
a whole episode for you, Rich.
Rich, this is all for you tonight, buddy. We're here for you. And then my friend Duke, old friend Duke, is joining from LinkedIn. And unfortunately, when you're not on YouTube, I can't bring comments into the under the visuals here on the screen for everyone to see. But Duke is here. He's on LinkedIn watching. Thanks for being here, buddy. We appreciate it.
Right on. Good deal.
Yeah, and my music even stopped. What happened there? That's no bueno. Well, listen, should we get jumped into
Jeff,
it?
I'm telling you, it's a night of technical issues. I don't know what's going on. My audio just like suddenly cut out. Then my computer crashed.
Oh, dude.
I
have a sound effect for that. Hold on.
Boom.
See?
Yeah. We are at alert status.
We are. We totally are.
Let's get into turbo lasers versus phasers and phase inducers. Yes. We have a great topic tonight. Jeff, I think we should kick it off.
Let's do it. All right. We'll see you guys everyone in just a sec.
Right on.
There we go.
Boom.
So we don't have this technical issue. The overlay is here. There's our topic up there. It's all set up. We're good. This is going to be awesome. Rich, this is all for you tonight, buddy. It really is.
Yeah.
We were talking about this. And we're like, at some point, we have to do this.
Got to do it.
And I was thinking about a title. I'm like, how can I do this in a friendly way that brings the community together? I'm like, no, forget that. We're going to do this fun and have everyone see it and go, wait, what? And then read the description and realize we're not actually going to be spicy or have high takes. It is always just so thought of as like, no Star Trek, no Star Wars. It's like, they can be together. Like, you can like both. That's okay.
Yeah, we are going to get into it. We're going to be, I saw someone already bring up Heisenberg compensators, we're going to be talking about that stuff because I am a big fan of both of these things. And one of the cool things that Jeff and I have talked about is, as anybody who's been tuning into the channel lately knows, while the Book of Boba Fett was going on, we did an after every episode of Book of Boba Fett, and we rated it, we reviewed it, and we gave it a letter grade. And then at the end, we did a full roundup. And in fact, if you want to hear any of our previous reviews of those, if you are just catching up now's the chance to go and check that out. Obi-Wan is coming out on May 25th, which is we're both super excited for it. I'm also excited to have a Star Wars come out in May. Star Wars, when I was a kid, like the prequels came out in May. One of them came out on my birthday. Like Star Wars, the original Star Wars came out in May. And so it's like really cool to have this to look forward to. But in the intervening weeks between now and then, we're going to have an episode where we do kind of a preview of Obi-Wan. But Jeff, I like these ideas of us kind of talking about other fandoms in the interim. And so tonight it's going to be Star Trek. It sounds like we're also interested. We're planning on doing a Lord of the Rings, which I'm not joking around. This could be the One Ring chat. Like I can get down into One Ring. But we'd love to hear from you too. If there's a fandom that you would like us to talk about, especially in context of Star Wars, or Dune, for example, Phantom around Dune.
Oh, yes.
We'd love to hear your
Absolutely.
comments on the upcoming weeks. But tonight, you wanted to kick this off, Jeff. Star Trek. So yeah, I'm like super excited about this.
I'm gonna leave it to you though. No, you need to be the one who kicks us off. You had some cool ideas about how to kick this thing off. This has got to be you. This is your baby. You got to do this.
Okay, so I am not a good decider in this, and the reason why is because I like grew up loving Star Wars. Like everything that I had was Star Wars. Star Wars, like a day and night, you know. That comment, for example, that we were both responding to Twitter on today, which I think you can find on the Kessel Chat Twitter, which is what Star Wars movie made the biggest impact on you. And you brought up Rogue One, and I brought up Empire because Empire was so much of like how I grew up. Like I hated Empire when I was a kid. I was terrified by it. Yoda was scary in Empire to like a kid, you know, like Luke's like, I'm not afraid. And Yoda's like, you will be. And I thought, gosh, what's he going to do to this guy?
Right.
And Dagobah seemed like a really scary place. It didn't seem like, you want to take a vacation there. And as I grew up, I grew up with a better appreciation of Empire, and I loved it. And it kind of mirrored a lot of maturity for me, as well as I think in the series. And I was a Star Wars fan until I was like 10 years old, like everything Star Wars. And I had like the Millennium Falcon. I had all these things. I even started reading some of the Star Wars books, but then there was this giant gap. So if anybody was, growing up through the 80s, that we didn't have a lot of things. Like, unless you were like all for the Caravan of Courage, the Ewok movies, or you went to Star Tours, there wasn't a lot of Star Wars. And I still remember a friend of mine, kid named Michael McGilligan. He asked me, I was like a second grader, and he said, hey, have you ever watched Star Trek? And I said, no, I've never watched Star Trek. And I just thought, I'll never get into that. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And I can remember like it was Star Trek Next Generation. I remember the first episode I watched, and I was like, boom, in. Like, I was just all the way there. And suddenly I had this thing that I could enjoy that was putting out a new episode every single week. And there were all these movies that I hadn't really seen. And, Captain Kirk and all this stuff. Like, I was like, oh, wow, this is great. And like I even remember like thinking like, oh, wow, like there's all this really cool stuff that I haven't seen. And so Star Trek was this thing that I got super into during that gap between when there was no Star Trek and then the prequels. And almost as I was like, Star Trek was ending, or the Next Generation was ending, and you got Deep Space Nine and Voyager and everything that started coming up after that. Star Wars was about to kick off again, and they're both like super special to me. They both represent so many different things. Like, I feel like Star Trek has a lot of things that I like, which is it's about a future that I wish I lived in. And that's Star Trek. And Star Wars is about a story in the past that with a power that I wish was real. And so it's like they're these two diametrically opposed things. But I thought it would be better to start with you, Jeff, because you already have a baked in opinion on Star Wars. And I feel like it would be better to hear, what do you know about Star Trek? And like, what are your thoughts about it?
Well, no, I'm kidding. Totally not kidding. I have nothing super profound. It's awesome. Sorry, I was replying back to some folks in the chat. I have to navigate like 3 different apps to reply back to everybody back in the chat, so everyone feels good. I'm so glad everyone's here. Thank you all so much for being here.
Right on.
Okay, so Star Trek. as you kind of described, longer story short, my dad first played Star Wars A New Hope. Well, Star Wars, when I think it was actually called A New Hope at the time, but we didn't think about it that way. On VHS at home that he had rented from, not Blockbuster, but had rented from a local video store by where we lived. Thankfully, he could get it. Apparently, they only had it on beta the first time he went, so he had to go back and get it on VHS. That's when I was watching this. Played it for me, and I was like completely blown away. Like, what is this? So fast forward, we get to watch all the other movies as they come out over the years. And when I don't remember when Next Generation came out, but my parents started watching Next Generation on TV. And
1987. I'm sorry, that's because I'm like.
Thank you. No, I wasn't worried about like not having this information. Like, I'm just gonna
Don't worry, everybody. If you need to know the top limit speed of a Galaxy class starship, I'll be able to talk about that too.
For everyone, just a quick deviation for everyone's information. If you didn't know, Ryan's kind of like Star Trek, a lot.
Huge fan. As does Rich, a regular viewer on our show.
Right?
Rich,
exactly. And in Star Wars, they would call that a lore master. I don't actually know what it would be called in Star Trek, but that would be Ryan that way.
Yes. Yeah. I can mix it up.
Exactly. So anyway, my parents were watching Next Generation. It was like their routine at night to watch TV. And when Next Generation was on, that was just a TV show they watched in the evening. We never had cable TV growing up, so they only ever had like channels. It was like 2 through 13. Like those were the channels you had, and like 28 was PBS. That's it. So whatever channel Next Generation came on, that's what they watched. And for a while, I didn't understand it. I saw it and I was like, okay, I don't know what this is, but eventually, like, I just got tired of being up in my room by myself when my parents watched TV. So I'll come down and watch what they're watching, and then I just started to enjoy it. But I never watched it consistently. I didn't watch it every single week with them or whenever the new episodes came out. So it always felt very disjointed. It just always, I enjoyed it because it was sci-fi, but I had a hard time getting into it because, I mean, I think it's also at this time now we know things come out. We know what's going to come out. We know when things are going to be on. Yep. We have ways of watching them that they're like predictable. We know that stories are going to progress. But at that time, I didn't understand what a sitcom was, or that style of TV show. I didn't understand what that meant. That every week there would be a new episode. And it would progress the story a little further. I thought these were just things that you just watched. I just didn't know. And over the years, I wouldn't say I'm a big Star Trek fan, but over the years, I've consumed Star Trek in different ways. Like when I did watch Deep Space Nine, and I don't remember anything about it other than a couple characters, but I do remember watching that, and I remember that it being a lot darker than Next Generation, and I do remember being more attracted to those stories than Next Generation because they felt. I can use these words now. I don't think I said the same thing back then, but they felt more real to me. Yes. It felt more like. This is the stuff that real people deal with. Well, real in the 23rd or 24th century, whatever century they're in. Like real to real people at that time, as opposed to what you said. Kind of, we've talked about this word, sort of almost utopian. Like utopian challenges. This was almost more of like practical world challenges. And then Voyager. When Voyager came out, I watched Voyager and I loved it. I actually, because it felt so different to me that like you had the first few episodes, it was heart-wrenching. Like, oh my God, they're literally stuck. Holy crap. Like, wow. I actually remember feeling very emotionally connected to it. And then watching the struggles that they had with having to grow their own food and do all these types of things that we've never had to see in Star Trek before. And I think when those shows started coming out, I really got more and more interested in the show. I never stuck with it super long, but enough that I was like, no, I remember this and I like this because it didn't feel like just the perfect people dealing with the perfect situations all the time is kind of how I remembered it. That's not how it is, but that's how I remembered it for so long for some reason. So it's a long version of the answer to your question, but what got me my parents had me watch all the movies when they were available to rent on VHS and later DVD and things like that. So I had watched all the movies from when I was a kid. I like the newer movies personally, just because I don't know. I just like the newer movies better. But that's just me.
What happens to be directed by the same guy that did the sequels. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, there you go. So I think overall my experiences with Star Trek and my connection to it are wide and varied, and they're sort of muddied. Like they're not really connected. I'll be honest, I've never sat down and said, you know what, I'm going to make a concerted effort to try to just consume these timelines and enjoy the shows. I did start watching Next Generation again recently, and I got a few episodes in. I started after Beard.
Starting yeah. You gotta start when they grow the beard, because which is a famous thing about Star Trek Next Generation. The first season is horrible. I mean horrible. Like they could burn it, and it'd be fine. Like just you don't. And I'm not a huge fan of the second season. In fact, I think the second season has the mix of some of the best episodes and some of their worst episodes. But Riker grows a beard, and it's the opposite of jumping the shark from Happy Days. That
I still love that. It's one of my favorite.
Yeah, like when a show grows the beard, when it's like because Riker grows a beard, and suddenly the show gets better, and really the real thing that happens is that, and I like Gene Roddenberry, because Gene Roddenberry had this vision of a future that I kind of would like. It does make it hard to write for television, which is Gene Roddenberry wanted a future where humans weren't in conflict, that the pursuing of money and possessions was not the driving force of humanity, and that we are on a quest to better ourselves. Or as Captain Sisko would say, we're looking not just for answers to our questions, but for new questions. I love that future. Mm-hmm. Like, beam me to that future, or slingshot me around the sun and get me to the future, for any fan that's out there and knows what I'm talking about. Warp 10 me there. But the thing
Ludicrous
that I
speed. No. Wait,
yeah, exactly.
Different
again,
sorry, different movie.
Yeah, but I will say Spaceballs has a good mix of all of it together. What's the matter, Colonel Sanders? Chicken?
Chicken.
But
stop. That's a different show. That's a different show.
It's a different show. But in this is just one of those things where I think that show took off when, unfortunately, Gene Roddenberry was just unable to keep up with the day-to-day. And they brought in a group of writers in the third season, some of whom are very famous now, like Ronald D. Moore, who did the reimagining of Battlestar Galactica. I don't know if you followed the Battlestar Galactica. Oh gosh,
not the newer ones. No.
Wow,
I watched it a bit when I was a kid, the original, but no. I tried to get into it, but it was too at the age I was at, it was too non-conflicting. Like there was just too much drama, too much talky, and I couldn't. At that time, that was like something I was like, no, I can't. I needed action. I needed movement. I needed action. And when they were just talking all the time and in conflict with each other, I was like, okay, call me when something else is happening.
And Battlestar Galactica is like opposite Star Trek, where Star Trek's like, we all respect each other and we have no conflicts with each other, and let's figure out a way to work together. And Battlestar Galactica is like the opposite. They're like, I can't trust anyone. But yeah, by the way, I see Duke's comment about there are 4 lights. Chain of Command Parts 1 and 2, some of the greatest television ever made. Why didn't Patrick Stewart win an Emmy for that? The show is really takes off in the third season, the Next Generation, and it really builds on something that I don't think was really there and that's no shade on the original series, but they really made it a character-driven story. And these are the things that actually make Star Trek great. I'm sorry, Star Wars great. Is they focus in on the characters. And suddenly, every season, like starting in the third season, every episode is about a character. And as we've talked about in the past, there's no greater story to tell than a character in conflict with their heart, or a character between a choice. Like they're stuck between a thing that they want to do and a thing that they know they should do. And I think about like Hallmark episodes of Star Trek Next Generation, like The Best of Both Worlds, where you have a character like Will Riker, who when he encounters the best of both worlds, which is he wants to stay on the ship that he's at, but to have the role that he wants, which is to be the captain. And when he ultimately gets that, and for people who know what that episode's all about, it's a devastating thing that happens to him. That wanting is sometimes not the same as having. These are great lessons that are learned on a weekly basis on Star Trek. And but I feel like I'm just shoveling on the praise for Star Trek, and I will get to why this isn't such an easy thing for any fan that's out there. If you're out there and you're like, I love Star Trek and I love Star Wars, I feel like the difference really becomes one between, one of them is science fantasy, and that's Star Wars. And science fantasy is all like transporting you to another world, transporting you to this like it's almost like a fairy tale. You have a farm boy who finds out that he has this really amazing mystical power, and he has a mentor, and you get to see this overarching, hero's journey set against a space opera, and all of the effects are unbelievable. I will say this: I feel like it's okay to like both, because Star Wars is this great fantasy and Star Trek is this great fiction, but I don't think you get Star Wars without the 1960s Star Trek. And I don't think you get the amazing revival of Star Trek in the 80s without Star Wars.
I agree.
Star Wars would have died had Star Trek not come out, because they didn't, phase 2 was struggling, and then Paramount saw the money that came in from Star Wars and said, let's get a movie out there. And they had Star Trek, and they said, let's develop this property. Let's go. I don't think you get all the great, you don't get Jean-Luc Picard. You don't get the Borg. You don't get all of it, Captain Janeway. You don't get Captain Sisko. All of these amazing stories that happen without Star Wars coming out in 1977. That's what propels all this moving forward.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the difference, I think giving audiences the distinction between, as you said, science fiction and science fantasy. So what they get to see are, they're clearly not two different takes on the exact same story, but they are both creators were so heavily inspired by each other, or for the most part, as well as some of the same root things in Westerns and samurais and all these other cultures. They were both inspired in large part by the similar things, Joseph Campbell and his work on the hero's journey and things like that, that you get. It's almost like watching two different sides of the same core through line of storytelling when you watch Star Wars and Star Trek. And it's for I think for most people, being able to go back and forth between the two is kind of nice, because it gives you a break when you get to a point where the emotion and some of the things, the space wizard type stuff. And I like to use that phrase just so everyone watching. I love the Jedi, and I love everything about. We talked about it over and over again, but I like to use the term space wizard just as a way to not to sound like a sycophant for the Jedi. Like, I just want everyone to just know, I'm not being a smartass about them. I love them to death, but I think it's also it makes it a little bit more humorous and fun. But you have that side of things, and when the sort of the dogma and the empire and the overwhelming, overarching thing that's happening to everyone at the same time gets to be a little much, you can go back to Star Trek and have this set of characters that you're watching be developed, and sometimes in sharp conflict with Monster of the Week style thing.
Yes.
But also in sharp conflict with each other and other just personal things that are happening. Many of the episodes I've watched don't always have a clear and distinct antagonist. It's more of antagonistic things that are happening between the characters on the show that is necessary to show their development and their change and growth over time. And that's different than how Star Wars tends to play out. Star Wars tends to much more often, even in, I've got them sitting right here. Hold on. So even in the High Republic era stuff, where you have these are two different Jedi, a master and an apprentice. Even in this era, we are still bouncing around a lot, where we see this character here, and then the next time we see them in their timeline is a month or two later. It happens right away afterwards, but it's a month or two later or a couple weeks later. So we're not really we're seeing their development over time, but there's a lot of gaps. Whereas with Star Trek, yes, there are still gaps, but we're not really getting, it's not Data and somebody else did something, and then we missed 2 months and they developed a little bit in the last 2 months. No, we actually get to see that on a much more regular. We're like really following the characters much more closely to their timeline than we are with most Star Wars properties that come out. And I think that gives you the ability to have a bit of a break between how you're consuming each type of content. It's something you'd said earlier, and I forgot to bring it up a moment ago, was one of my favorite moments of Star Trek is, I don't remember what point in the movie it happens, but there's a scene between Picard and Lily, or Alfred Woodward, where they're talking, and he's trying to decide what to do, and he wants to do one thing, but you know he wants to do something else, and he's losing it. And she calls him Captain Ahab, and he loses his shit before he finally realizes, oh, I have to do this other thing. I've got to go do this. But it's one of my favorite interactions because it shows.
I can do the whole thing, man. I'm not joking around.
Oh, I
like it is one of my favorite, like, it is a great moment in Star Trek. Patrick Stewart's a great actor. Had his chest been a cannon, he would have shot his heart upon it. It is a line that is so well delivered. Gosh, I keep going, man. You're talking about one of my favorite scenes.
Yeah, it's I just remember it because you get to watch a character that we've been following for a long time, through TV show for a long time, and then the movies, and then I don't want to say he's faultless, because he isn't, and we see him at his down parts, or downsides, when he struggles and he's just a human being, but he always has such a stoicism about him that even when he's having a problem, he still carries himself in very like, wow, that's a true leader. And in that scene, you really get to see him not be that for a moment or two. Even he breaks down, because here's somebody who doesn't work for him, doesn't make any difference. Like, you can't order her around. She's not part of your chain of command. And the character's like, I'm going to say whatever the hell I need to say. And right now, dude, you're being sorry for the foul language. Like, you're being a dick, and I'm going to tell you you're being a dick in a way that's going to hurt you. So when she calls him Captain Ahab because he starts bringing things like, well, we live in the future where money's not an object for us, and we're beyond all those petty squabbles. She's like, oh, are you now? She's like, sure you are. And I love the way in which she calls out his character, because it's, as you and I have talked before, like, that's one of the clear distinctions between the type of story that we see in Star Wars and in Star Trek. Is in Star Trek, you've got this sort of utopian, it's not really utopian, but it's sort of like pseudo-utopian future where many of the problems that we deal with now, like money and a constant drive towards wealth and riches and those sorts of things, are for the most part gone, at least in amongst human society, or at least that's what they like to tell themselves, and the strive is for betterment and all that. Great, that's fantastic. I'm not going to dig that. I'm not going to put that down at all. But in that moment, you realize when she calls him out, she's reminding him, like, no matter what you tell yourself, at the end of the day, you are still a human being, and these ideas of not being after certain things, they may not be money anymore or power, or those things from these archaic things from the past, but those things were replaced by something else, because we're still people. And she calls him out, and he realizes it. Of course, that's why he responds the way he does. But it's her calling him out as Captain Ahab, I think, is the best way she could have gotten to him in that moment. And I love it. Like, it's one of the few moments in anything I've watched Star Trek wise that, like, I see something in Star Trek and I'm like, oh, I remember that. But it's one of the few moments I actually remember. Like, I remember that. I couldn't quote it, but I remember the interaction.
It's a great moment because he's gone through this terrible trauma. He's been kidnapped and mutilated by the Borg in the past. And if this was a problem actually with the show, and I will say this, is that Star Trek had this problem of they'd have to, and I see the ship in a bottle, also a great episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. Ship in a bottle is the problem that Star Trek The Next Generation had is they'd run a 60-minute episode, or 55 or 40-minute, whatever episode. And then it'd have to reset to get to the end. You'd have to reset the whole story. Like whatever they encountered, well, they had to end at a place where they started, because the next episode had to come out the next week. So you couldn't have like just random people die, or like, oh, look, so-and-so, it would have to be like written into the show. Like, it was a big deal when someone like changed divisions and suddenly is wearing a yellow uniform instead of a red one. I mean, there was any type of change on the show, show was always like heavily managed and mitigated and planned out.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was always an issue, because when Picard is kidnapped and has all these terrible things happen to him with the Borg, they had this episode that happened immediately after. It's in fact the lowest watched episode. It's one of the best episodes of Star Trek Next Generation. It's called Family. And it's where Picard deals with that trauma. And he goes home and has this amazing encounter with his brother Robert. And I won't spoil it, because if everyone should watch this. If you've encountered a trauma in your life, this is how people deal with it. He goes home in denial. He goes home for safety. He won't admit that to himself, because he's the great Captain Picard, you know? And then in the end, all of those walls of defense fall, and he's able to be vulnerable to someone that he feels safe being vulnerable around, which is his brother. And it is a great scene. It's a great story. But then the very next episode, it's like he's fine again. This happens with another episode, like The Inner Light, where he's lived an entire lifetime in the course of 20 minutes, had a wife, had children, had grandchildren, and then comes out of it. And it's like, oh, in the next episode, it's like he's fine. They had to go back and do another episode just to deal with the trauma of what that would be like. And that is a thing that Star Trek does poorly. And I'm glad that it ended up in First Contact, because that's why he is so vengeful. He isn't the high-minded human in that way, because he's trying to get revenge against someone that's wronged him. Whereas Star Wars is all about dealing with those characters in literally every micro change that they're going through. You follow Luke through everything that he wins at, that he loses at, and you are able to follow that entire story. Star Wars isn't about, well, by the end of the movie, we got to reset these guys so that way Luke's back on Tatooine as a farm boy, so we start the next movie there. Instead, every movie is trying to build on the last. So the serial nature of Star Wars is really what gives, I think, its greater ability to tell a larger story arc. Whereas over the course of 7 seasons, you would need all 7 years of Star Trek Next Generation to see that character growth, because so much of in the story is put into, we'll reset them at the end. We got to reset them back because they're on the ship again. They got, set us course for Starbase 28, Warp 2, let's go. That's the antithesis of Star Wars. Star Wars is all about, wow, Luke got his arm cut off. Han Solo's in carbonite, and guess what? It's not easily all wrapped up at the end, and now they're going to go off on another adventure.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that was one of the biggest carrying points about shows like the Clone Wars.
Yes.
No, I shouldn't say the Clone Wars to a point, but almost more so was Rebels, and then the Bad Batch afterwards is exactly what you said. Is in each Rebels is a probably even better example of it than the Clone Wars. The Clone Wars definitely started it, but the Clone Wars still bounced around a lot, so that in many cases you get that very monster of the week sort of feel, like Scooby-Doo sort of feel, where there are several serial arcs that happen over the course of a couple different episodes we have to follow, but many of them are like one point in time something happens, and then the characters also in the next episode, next time you see them, show up in a different place at a different time. You're like, oh, so that was just a thing that happened. Cool. It's entertaining, but I think in Star Wars Rebels, in the animated series, we get this even more in spades, because we have to follow these characters through an ongoing set of things that is happening, and whatever happened in the last episode, they just have to deal with it again in the next episode. If it ended, whatever just happened, they're going to have to they got to keep on trucking in the next one, because like you said, if someone lost an arm or whatever happened, it has now happened. Like sorry for, oh, hold on. Let me try to do it real quick.
Oh, spoilers. Yeah, we're in spoiler territory.
Oh, I didn't play the audio. Rebels. Where's my audio? Hold on. Wait.
Hey, look, hey, by the way, like I'm going to say right now, I love this klaxon alert more than the one in Star Trek. The one in Star Trek is so bad, the main characters even say, turn it off.
Yeah. Cut it.
Yeah.
So anyway, in Rebels, or what I was going to continue saying, I think it was going to continue saying, is in Rebels, there's a scene where when Ahsoka, Kanan Jarrus, and Ezra go to, I'm blanking on the planet's name, but they go to this planet and they find an ancient Sith temple. Maul's there, they fight some Inquisitors, and Maul ends up hurting Kanan and slicing his eyes, so he loses his vision. And he loses his vision. You don't just have another episode after that where Kanan's, cool, I'm good. I healed, put some back to patches on my face, and we moved on. He didn't have his eyes don't work anymore. Like, they're done. And so the character itself of Kanan now has to change as a result of what just happened, which then has to change all of the other characters. And we see that, like in the episodes, they have a falling out and things happen, and there's a disconnection between master and apprentice and whatever, because each person is now dealing with these trauma in different ways and finding different things. They meet the Bendu, and there's all kinds of stuff that happens after that. And I love that about, and I want to see, to your point, I want to see more of that from both Star Trek and Star Wars. I think we actually got a lot of that in Picard, in the first season of Picard, and I loved getting back to Star Trek for a minute. Star Trek Picard is probably, for me, the best Star Trek I've ever watched. It just is. It because you get to see, to your point, Picard is not the great Picard anymore. He's just a dude who lives in a winery, and people look up to him, but he's kind of living, most people say, you're living your best life, man. It's your golden years. You live in a winery. There's a couple Romulans to take care of you. That's weird. Cool. You're just kind of like, you're good. And then shit happens. And when the shit happens, it doesn't just happen. And when you go back and learn about like the disconnection between him and his friend and compatriot, and like how that fell apart and what he did to cause it, like he tried, but then she wanted to keep trying and he didn't want to keep trying, and it fell apart. Like, you see that, you're like, and then when he finally goes and meets her again, she is like throwing bottles at him, like, get the hell away from me. Like, I like it not because of the conflict, but I like it because there is real emotion and feeling that is behind the interactions that you are seeing that are carried over from things that did happen before. And you start to see him more as a practical person as opposed to somebody up on a pedestal that somebody put him up on a pedestal, if that makes any sense.
And I actually think that you're hitting on something that is, you're hitting on something too that I think is really a thing that is happening right now, which is in stories, we aren't holding things sacred. Or as we've talked about, you have to kill your darlings. If you look at The Last Jedi, you look at how Picard was handled in the Picard series, and you look at The Last Jedi and how Luke Skywalker was handled. One of the things, because fans had problems with the Picard series and fans had problems with The Last Jedi, and in uniform ways, it was in how one of the main characters is handled. People didn't like what was done with Luke Skywalker. And I feel like all of the positive reaction to Luke Skywalker that we see in things like The Mandalorian or even the Book of Boba Fett, that fits more with what people were expecting of a Luke Skywalker character in the future. Yeah. And instead, when you get this Luke Skywalker character who is, I've cut myself off from the Force. I'm deliberately here. You're interrupting I want to be absent from the galaxy. Mm-hmm. And likewise, I don't think you get a, Picard shouldn't be like jumping over stuff and shooting phasers and everything. That's also not that character. That character, and it should be, and just like how Mark Hamill's an older guy. It's okay for Luke Skywalker to be an older guy, to have years of wisdom behind him. You have Picard, who's also feeling the kind of like the age. I feel like, and I understand that these are hard things to deal with. I get it, because when I immediately saw Picard, I was like, is this my Captain Picard? And I immediately thought of all the fandom where someone says, that's not my Luke Skywalker. That's not my Captain Picard.
And I know you have, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Amy's got this comment here, and Amy, we're going to get back to this because I actually disagree. I want to get back to it because I actually disagree with this, but that's okay. Let's get back to that in a minute. Ryan, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we'll get back to that in a minute.
I know. I guess what I mean is I'm okay to have different takes on these characters, is what I mean. Um, as long as it's kind of respectful, as long as there's a lot of thought that's put into it. And I feel like that, and I feel like I'm a fan of The Last Jedi. I'm not a fan of The Rise of Skywalker, and one of the reasons why is because I feel like, and there's the gap in thought, and there's a similar thing that happens in Picard, where sometimes that the reach gets just beyond the grasp. Like, it's like, I understand that you were trying to defy my expectations. I get it. And I'm on board. Like, tell me that story. But sometimes
take me away.
Yes. Sometimes it seems that they just don't get the landing right. And that's why it's like I'm really excited to see Picard, the second season 2 of Picard, because it's like I want to see where that could go.
I will say that I am scared of watching. I it's so weird to say this, but I am kind of scared to watch the season 2. Because
I'm there. I'm already there.
With Q coming back, I'm like, okay, but as soon as I saw that Q was the antagonist, or not, I hate to call him an antagonist because it's too simple. It's too binary to call Q an antagonist, because sure, but not really. I don't know. That's probably a whole conversation on its own. But when I saw that,
it's like being mad at a tornado. He's like a force of nature. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You can be, but it's not going to change anything.
No, because he does. He provided, if you believe that he is in fact the one that gives Picard the moment where he can go and in the episode Tapestry and show what happens when you try to change a part of your life. And Picard has his whole what's the Christmas movie? It's a Wonderful Life moment, where Picard realizes how these things how these things happen. Q is a force for meddling, in almost like a fantasy way, like Loki or something. Like I have come around on Q quite a bit over the years, and so yeah, I would agree. You can't call him an antagonist, but I feel like he's there. He's like that bit of Twilight Zone that you can have in Star Trek sometimes.
Yes,
that person who's there to show you a mirror that wouldn't otherwise be there.
To put that mirror in front of you that you need this gut check periodically. Like sometimes you just, and no one's giving it to you, so I'm gonna take it upon myself to do it. Yeah, it was mostly though when I saw that I was like, okay, it's cute, all right, this is cool. But then when I saw the very dystopian sort of like empirical, very kind of has very Nazi-ish sort of vibes, Handmaiden's Tale sort of thing, I was like, oh man, this is, I don't know. Some of these vibes kind of hit a little close to home for things that we've been dealing with for the last like 4 or 5 years in our own world.
Topical
and I'm like,
show.
Yeah, and I'm like, okay, this is gonna be hard. I mean, it's gonna be great, but it's gonna be really tough to watch. And I'm like, okay, gotta get myself mentally psyched up for the idea of watching the show. And yes, Joanna, we did it for you and Rich. We just did this purely for you and Rich. Everyone else, we appreciate you. No, I'm kidding.
No, but by the way, Joanna, thank you for joining us. We're always really excited to be able to talk about the 2 stars, Trek and Wars, and it's like so great to have everybody here. I see this note, by the way, about at the end. This is obviously a spoiler for those of you who have not seen the Picard show. Picard season 1. It does end in a really unusual way. I could not agree with this more. I did not like the whole Picard's now in a synthetic body. It literally is the antithesis of what they were trying to tell in that entire season, which is accepting the limits of oneself and kind of finding power in that. I also think that it robs Picard irrevocably of his humanity. I get that the synthetic body, he can die at any time, but it then also brings up all these like Ship of Theseus things.
Yes.
That I'm like, I don't want to get into that. Like that, like somewhere on that weird dirt planet with all this Palm Springs planet where all the androids live, there is a body of Picard that's buried. And then there's also robot Picard now, who is
I mean,
I don't know.
I'm like,
Yeah,
do androids dream of electric sheep? I don't know.
yeah,
Maybe they
it's
do.
one of these things that I feel like I've had a lot of people tell me, "Oh, come on, man! Like you buy into science fiction, you love the Twilight Zone, like go the distance on this one." But that was actually a
Yeah,
bridge just too far.
I agree. It felt very.
Yeah.
It had a. It has a very. Oh crap! We've got to make another season because we're making this is really good. People like this. How do we make another season? Give them a new body. Cool. Now we can make part 2. It's like.
No,
Okay,
give him a robot brain.
but...
Give him a robot brain, but the whole body is like it's like there was a lot of other things they could have done. I understand he has Irumodic syndrome. We talked about that in All Good Things, season 7. But yeah, I feel like that was just one of those things that I feel like, oof, I wish I could have been in the writer's room for that. And that is that season was written by one of my favorite writers ever, Michael Chabon. Who wrote an amazing movie called Wonder Boys, which is another great movie about what it is, kind of coming into your own as in your age. Like I love that movie, and Michael Douglas is great in that role, and Michael Chabon, that is a almost autobiographical tale of him when he is at Pitt. And he also wrote a book called The Adventures of Cavalier and Clay. If you love comic books, this is a novel. It won the Pulitzer Prize. It's an amazing book. But yeah, I almost wish that I could have been in that writer's room and said, I hear your idea, Pulitzer Prize winning Michael Chabon, but if I, English major Ryan Rose, could give you just my 2 cents, I would not have done the body. I would have just made it a robot brain.
Yeah,
that's it.
I totally agree with you on that one. I think that could have. If I feel like you and I have said this both several times about Star Wars and other things too, but Star Wars especially, that sometimes when books are written or TV shows are made or movies are made, a thing occurs, something happens, a conflict happens, but it's not earned. Like it's just it doesn't feel like it's earned, and I feel like by doing what they did and giving him that robot body, whether they intended to or not, what they actually created is a situation where now he gets to just continue on in the next season, and cool, you can just kind of keep going, no worries. But there's no through line struggle that is consistent there, other than he's just old. Like okay, fine, but if they had done something like we can replace and give you a different, like some cybernetics in your brain or something that you might be able to kind of see visually, but it kind of disappears with some makeup. Like we could do something, but it's not going to last forever. And then that could pick up again as a periodically that's got to be checked on, or he gets hit and he gets damaged and it comes back to haunt them later on. That would have been better because, to your point, not a new body. They fixed a problem, but they almost kind of band-aided a problem, and it could have carried through and been a struggle that his character has to deal with. You can now inject things into the story like, hey, periodically he just gets a little cuckoo bananas and gets really pissed off about something, or super sad because this is causing some problems for him, and those things can happen. You can deal with that like a real human would have to deal with trauma from cancer treatments or brain injuries or whatever. But instead, they wiped all that out. They just wiped it all out and said, cool, no problem. We're just gonna spin it back up again and keep going. It's like, you made it. You made this too simple. That's not how it's. I don't know.
No, it's like I'll get it, but I'm cool with it. Like I'm not gonna say write off the whole thing because of that. And I think that's kind of how I am.
I'm
gonna
watch
Star
the second
Wars.
season. Don't worry.
No. I'm gonna watch the second season because, by the way, like if there's a thing that Star Trek has that Star Wars does not have, and it's only kind of played with this from time to time in like Rebels, is a hallmark of some of my favorite Star Trek episodes, and this is even 1960s Star Trek, which with the episode "The City on the Edge of Forever." Star Trek has time travel, and Star Wars doesn't. Star Wars as a fantasy story, because it's not it's science fantasy and it's a space opera and it's not science fiction. It doesn't have a tremendous, and I'm not gonna say it's not science fiction, like someone's gonna come in and be like, oh, what do you mean? I just mean it doesn't do that kind of classic science fiction things, and that is what you see in time travel. these time travel stories that Star Trek does are some of my favorite stories, whether it is in the 1960s with the City on the Edge of Forever, which is one of the greatest pieces of television. If anyone's on here and hasn't watched the City on the Edge of Forever, oh my gosh, it is so great. Shatner turns in an A-class performance. Like, I mean, just so great. Do you know what you did, Jim? Do you know what you did? He does, Doctor. He does. Oh my gosh, that scene at the end is unbelievable. And it has the first curse word uttered on American television in prime time, where he says, "Let's get the hell out of here," because he has had that type of experience. And by the way, I totally agree. I know that they tell him that that he doesn't know when he's gonna die, but the problem that I had with so you're right, like Picard doesn't know when he's going to die, but the problem that I had is the whole season is building up to letting Data die, because what Data says, a butterfly that isn't, it's like a butterfly that's not a butterfly, you know, what is it? Like, if it can't fly, or if it can't die, is it still a butterfly? And Data talks about the uniqueness of death as something that would help in his human journey. That Data's whole character arc from 1987 to, you know, last year is his pursuit of becoming more human. And that he says in that because he's a robot and because he's got this, you know, computer intelligence, he can never die unless he's shut off. And so they shut him off. And then they do the opposite with Picard. And this beautiful thing that they had with Data is this thing that they kind of take away from Picard. And so I understand the cool science fiction like switcheroo on that, but I kind of hated the dichotomy of having those two scenes together. And the song at the end is Blue Skies, which is a song that Data sings in Star Trek Nemesis and is listening to as he departs. And oh my gosh, is that scene so beautiful. I as you and I have talked about, Jeff, I love stories that have endings, and I love that they went back and gave Data a real ending. But yes, total divergence. Time travel is a thing that's great in Star Trek. Voyage Home, man. You'll never look at the Monterey Bay Aquarium again. I still walk into that place and go, "Where are the humpback whales?"
Right?
And,
every single time.
You know,
every single time. Where's this tank that you had humpback whales in magically someplace?
Yep.
Oh yeah, I do wish Star Wars, or I shouldn't say wish. I don't mean this is a real wish. I wish in the sense of like, oh, wouldn't it be cool? But when I practically think about it, I'm like, I don't think time travel is something that should really be attempted in Star Wars. I think that is something that is best left for Star Trek, because I think the genre, but specifically Star Trek, can handle the stories, can be told more effectively that way. If you brought something like that into Star Wars, it would feel like there's been plenty of times. The High Republic is a good example of this, but there's been other times where we've learned a little bit about how little the galactic scientists actually understand about hyperspace. There's still debate about whether it's an alternate dimension or traveling through dimensions or things like this. And in the High Republic, what they've done is they've touched on hyperspace as a way to, like, if something happens within hyperspace, there's no physical point in hyperspace that you're in. If there's a thing called this great disaster that happens where a ship exploded or crashed in hyperspace, and then when the things start coming out of hyperspace, it's not at one physical spot. It's because it was in hyperspace, these pieces start coming out at light speed in various parts of the entire galaxy along the particular hyperspace route that they were in, but not just in the one place, which is really interesting, because by doing that, they tell you that, well, there's an alternate, there must be some sort of other dimensional thing that is happening here, because otherwise, if it was physically in real distance, it should all come out basically at the same point, but it doesn't. Some of the things come out in behind where it was, some come out way in front of where it was, some come out at the exact point that it was in, and it's like, well, wait, what does that mean? And so there's this extra dimensional sort of thing that happens. They've touched on back in the EU, the Yuzong Vong, and being an extra galactic species that just was from without the galaxy, not from another galaxy necessarily, but traveling between galaxies. But they've never touched on time travel, and other than like visions and things like that, but not real. That's not real time travel. I'm glad that they haven't. We've talked about this before in earlier episodes of the Kessel Chat, where we discussed what could it look like that would be really interesting in Star Wars if you did time travel. I think there's still a case it could be made, but I think it would almost need to be like Star Wars, like MCU, or like Star Wars Visions or something, and it would need to be something where you're like, or like What If, where you're some character is opening a door to look at something that's happening and watching something happening over a period of time, but that character doesn't interact with the real creatures within the galaxy. But even then, that still feels a little, I don't know, for the practical nature of Star Wars in general, like how practical the stories tend to be within the context of that world that's been built. It would feel a little odd to me, like probably even beyond a little odd. I think it would be like, yeah, you missed the mark on this one.
No, I agree. In fact, there's a part of me that's like, I don't mind the surface exploration of things like hyperspace and because I know that, you know, light speed, hyperspace, all these things are like kind of thrown about, and how certain things are made in the Star Wars universe. I will say this, like, I actually love the things that Star Wars doesn't explain. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because I want all this explanation out of Star Trek because I've come to expect it. Like I get like crazy focused on like, did they drop the shields before they used the transporter? Because man, you can't transport through shields. Come on, you know. Whereas like I never like I'm not gonna just start up an old thing. Yeah, see, boom, right there. I'm not gonna like bring up an old fight, but it's like I never needed midichlorians. I never needed a scientific explanation for the Force because I just bought it. Like when Obi-Wan is explaining how the Force is just this, you know, energy and it, you know, binds, you know, it penetrates us, it binds the universe together. I just bought it. Like I never doubted things in the Star Wars universe when they just pop up at places and how hyperspace works. Or how lightsabers work. When they said, oh yeah, crystals power these, I could care less. Like, oh, that's amazing. Whereas I feel like that's healthy. Star Wars, be careful not to write yourself into a canon corner. Otherwise you'll end up in the throes of mycelial network stuff that's happening in Star Trek now, where like
the spore drive.
Star Trek. Yes, exactly. Star Trek struggles in its own canon sometimes. I mean, even I was just like, oh, mycelial network. I haven't heard about this. But Sarek has a foster child. You know, it's like Star Trek will consume itself sometimes in its own canon, and it has to be really careful. Like, and almost often has to rewrite its own history to accommodate for things that are said differently in the past. Like warp 13 exists in the original series. Oh, well, we rechanged the warp scale now, so that's why it stops at warp 10. You know, all these things keep having to be done. Star Wars doesn't need to live in that space.
Oh, dude, that's a hot Fridge. That is a hot take, man. That is a hot take. I don't know if I agree with you on that one.
I'd rather have a lightsaber than a batleth. I will say, like, when I was a kid and I saw the Enterprise D and even all of the Star Trek stuff, right? Like, I used to think, oh man, that's not cool stuff. Like the X-Wing fighter when I was like a kid, I was oh my gosh, that's so awesome. Because it looks like a jet fighter, you know, it looks like a plane. The Millennium Falcon, I thought, oh, did they make that look like a hand so that way a kid could do, right? So I totally get that. Like, I love the design aesthetic. I also like the fact that, again, we were talking about how Star Wars saves Star Trek. If you don't get great movies like The Wrath of Khan without ILM. Mm-hmm. You know, you don't get the Genesis device without ILM. So I will say that the design aesthetics there, but I will say that I actually appreciate like what the Jedi culture is, but man, I really dig the Klingon culture. Like, I love these like this samurai derived culture that's very much like the Jedi, except they're all about honor. I mean, the Jedi aren't drinking blood wine, but I will say that there's a really interesting there's really interesting parallels that I feel like everyone's kind of borrowing from various cultures. What I think is really interesting, though, and you were just talking about this, is both of these things, Star Trek and Star Wars, are trying to deal with politics or politics of their era. Star Wars deals with it at times, I would say, in a more timeless way. Although I feel like episode 1, by the way, Jason Belk saying the Spore Drive was ridiculous, +1 to that. I'm not a fan of that. I don't like it. I will never like it. I will never ever like it. I'm sorry.
By the way, I'm sorry. We have to pause on this for a sec. The Spore Drive, and if anyone hasn't watched it, the little creature that the big creature that the captain has trapped in his room, it's a freaking water bear. Like, it's a damn water bear, and they don't. It really irritates me that they don't actually say the real name of that creature. It's a real creature that exists on planet Earth right now. It's a thing.
Yeah,
it's an actual thing. I mean, hell, the Octonauts, the kids show that kids, they have a whole episode on water bears, and I watched it. And I'm like, they give this big, huge, fancy name, and it does it. I'm like, what? It's a little tiny little creature that lives in the volcanic like outlets in the deep ocean. Like, okay. Cool, but
it's funny because like it's funny how both of these shows, though, it's like they each have like their hits and misses. But I will say that, like, to Nick's point, oh man, like I'm sorry because I'm diverging away from my topic about politics, but I'll just say that, man, like I love the design aesthetic of the Enterprise D now. So, like, this picture that I have behind me, this I should have gotten it out for this episode. This same artist did a painting of the Enterprise D, and I bought it. Like, I bought that one first, and then I saw this version of the Millennium Falcon, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna buy this as well. Like, I could not agree more with Nick. Like, I kind of started to like super get into the design aesthetic, but I feel like that's like the beauty of having ILM involved in so many things back and forth. Even though I know that Star Trek's got its own artists, its own, like, you got like Rich Steinbeck and people like that who are building out like the Starfleet aesthetic. But yeah, like I actually just I feel like there was a comment about this before. I just happen to love them both. Like, it's hard for me to pick. I also like that they're both political. I love that Star Wars is dealing with politics. I love that episode 1 feels like a reflection on those early years before 9/11, where really we were having pointless fights about nothing in 1998 and 1999. Episode 1 comes out at a time where taxation and the outlying trade routes is roiling the Galactic Senate. Could that not be a better metaphor for what the United States was dealing with in the late 90s? We had nothing. There was, and then it was like we were bored with peace, which is like a Tolkien thing. Like, Tolkien said that the greatest threat to humanity is that people become bored with peace. By the way, like, I'm a huge Defiant fan too. Gosh, Nick, I could sit down and talk about design aesthetic. The Star Wars is a section of, I think, oh no, I don't know if you can see me. Oh, there. Yep. The Star Wars is a reflection of like a decade, whereas Star Trek is often a reflection of the moment. Like, there are episodes in Star Trek Next Generation where they're trying to deal with the conflict that was occurring in Ireland at the time. I don't think you get Deep Space Nine, which is dealing with the people that have been oppressed. I don't think you get that without some of the things that were happening all over the world. Some of the things that were coming out of Southeastern Africa. I just feel like Star Trek is politically representative of what's happening today. The 1960s, oh my gosh, Star Trek, the original series, is ahead of its time. It's dealing with so many things that are actually happening in that moment. Versus Star Wars, which is dealing with generational conflicts, where the original Star Wars is coming out of this era of Vietnam, coming into this era of lack of trust in the government. Then you have the prequels, which is that late 90s, early 2000s years, which is this kind of modern millennial look at what the end of an era of peace looks like. And then you have the sequel trilogy. And I think that that's also a really interesting reflection of the time that it's in. Maybe not even as much politically as it is commercially. What those things are. Oh man, Bell Riots. Gosh, I mean, this is what, yes, the Bell Riots. If you want to learn, if you want to see how Star Trek handled homelessness and how and the how people without property or without the proper identification were put in camps set up by the government. This is that's a great episode. It's I'm not as quick with the Deep Space Nine episode titles. It's not past prologue. That's episode 4 of Deep Space Nine. But yeah, it is one of them. It's like past tense part 1 and 2. But yeah, those are great episodes. But anyway, I'm sorry, Jeff.
No, you're fine.
I'm going on and on.
I've got a plethora of things to bring up and talk through on this. So I'm like, you do your thing, man. It's all good. It's all good.
Anyway, I'd love to hear your perspective on the politics of each. Again, I feel like Star Trek's definitely a politics of the day, but Star Wars, generational.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's, I think, in the eras of Star Wars that most people are familiar with and have seen, that you've been talking about, the Empire. I mean, the Empire is a simplistic construct, yet simplistic in that it represents so many different conflicting ideologies and conflicting problems, from xenophobia to just imperial rule and subjugation and things like control and power and all these things. So it allows for a lot of different nuanced stories to happen, where you can still point at the Empire as the place that those things are being driven out of. And so while simplistic, I think it's actually really good, because it creates a like a wealth of places that we can go to they can go to tap into these different types of struggles. What I've been loving in the recent couple of years is that we're getting a lot more stories that are tackling those sorts of problems, but with very different groups. So the High Republic that's happening right now, Phase 1 just wrapped up. We don't get Phase 2 until later on this year. Their political strife is less of, there's no empire, they're the Republic. It is the height of the Republic. And so what we see, like, literally people are repeating the phrase, "We are all the Republic." That's a phrase. And even citizens who don't, like, on different planets like Corellia and a few others, I'm trying to blank on some names right now, who might conflict with each other, even when that happens, when it comes down to it and they have to struggle together, they're willing to say things like, "We are all the Republic." Or when the Jedi's phrase is, "For light and life." And many in this recent book I was just reading, it's here someplace, the phrase is used, and people on Corellia are like, "For light and life, we're going to do this," as they conflict against this group called the Nihil, which are like these chaotic pirate sort of thing. They're doing something terrible in the galaxy. So it's kind of a different political representation. It's a group of people who want to live the way they want to live and the way they want to live it. And they don't want anybody else to tell them how to live it and how to go about doing that. So almost like if you put Vikings today, and Vikings that Vikinged and like raided towns and whatever else, people would be like, "They're terrible, they're horrible," and that group is like, "Screw you, this is just how we want to live. You get to live the way you want to live. Why can't we live the way we want to live?" That's an oversimplification, but it kind of is what's happening, which is its own set of challenges, and it's really interesting. But what they've also brought out in the last couple of years is Timothy Zahn has like reprised himself 2 different trilogies in the last 5 years or 4 years. So a Thrawn trilogy that was all about Thrawn through his time in the Imperial Navy, like when he's first discovered and people found him and he joined the Imperial Navy, all the way through the point of becoming the Grand Admiral.
Mhm.
And then a most recent trilogy, the most recent book was like 4 or 5 months ago. That trilogy took place when Thrawn is younger and living in what they call the chaos, or the Chiss ascendancy is within what they refer to as the chaos, which is really wild space or unknown space. And it leads up to the point of the first trilogy. Like it ends basically where the first trilogy, or shortly before the first trilogy begins. And we get to learn about a whole other part of the galaxy and different conflicts that are happening there. And as Thrawn would say, there are far worse things in this galaxy to deal with than rebels and things of that nature. And he's referring to all the stuff in the unknown territory, the unknown space and wild space. And it's fascinating because when you hear that, like, oh wow, how they, like, the Chiss ascendancy doesn't talk to anybody. People stay away from us. You stay away from them. There's all these myths about who the Chiss are because they don't get into other people's affairs at all in where they live, but you can't easily interact with each other in that part. You can't just jump into hyperspace and fly to some place. It doesn't work that way. So it's the politics and what they're getting into now it's more nuanced, but it's also more real. It's like very real. And when you read these things, like, oh wow, there are corollaries here to, like, with the Grisk and these other races they've been bringing up, where the interactions are not strictly warlike. They are manipulative, which is much more like we've seen in the last 10, 20, 30 years with countries and who want to rise to power and how they work. They don't just do things outright generally, except for maybe set aside the Ukraine stuff happening right now, which is horrible. But they don't typically do things outright. They do things that are subtle and political and maneuvering and back channeling. That's what they're doing in a lot of the news stories that they're putting out too, which is interesting because it lets you, as we've talked about before, it lets you have a more direct connection to what's happening because you can see the real world in that very quickly. And you're like, oh, I don't have to think about it too much. I get that because it was on the news yesterday. Cool. I understand what they just did. So now tell me how it all played out. And it almost lets you kind of put that, those things don't have to be explained so much, so that you can focus on how did those characters come about it, which I think is really interesting. It's an interesting way to get to that point.
Yeah, man. I think all art is political. I'm glad that Star Wars is able to, use its, because since Disney was able to acquire it, and it's been able to, like, build out a lot of new things that come out with Star Wars. I remember just feeling, and again, this is one of the reasons why I got into Star Trek. There were only, there were novels that were coming out, but they weren't coming out as frequently. And some of the story, then you had the video games, which were great, especially some of the video games that had, like, really intricate storylines, like Shadow of the Empire, which, we had talked about. But I'm glad that Star Wars is able to kind of have so much new content because they really can experiment with, like, the politics of the moment. And again, as much as people, I often will hear, like, oh, keep politics out of this. And it's like, all of these things are political. It's
100%.
like when I hear people say, like, Star Trek's not political. Why is Star Trek making all these political statements? And it's like, did you not watch the original series?
Because like, we're watching two different shows because
yeah, like there's a reason why George Takei is on that show. There's a reason why Nichelle Nichols is Uhura. Like, there's a reason why those castings were made. Like that show was political through and through. They were trying to make statements. They were trying to show a future that could be. And yeah, I think that type of politics is pervasive, and it's definitely seen as a reflection in what you see inside of Star Wars as well. And it's not even when someone says, well, that wasn't the message I intended. Well, writers often do that. Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien went to his grave saying that the Lord of the Rings had nothing to do with World War One. And it's like, it has everything to do with World War One.
Well, it's fascinating because I've had this conversation with my parents before and other folks as well who are like, it has everything to do with it. I'm like, no, you're missing the statement that you just said, which is he detested allegory. There's a very clear quote by him. He says, I detest allegory in all its forms and fashions. It's basically a blight on storytelling. That was his, to your point though, that isn't actually the point that you were making. Like, War, his experience in the trenches in World War I is what led to him writing and creating these stories. They motivated and inspired the stories that he created. the stories are not allegorical. They are not a retelling of World War One in a fantasy realm, but that's not the same thing. They are different. One is an inspiration, one is a direct representation. Like the book The Forever War is literally an allegory of Vietnam conflict, but that's not what this is. That's never what he wrote. It's never what he intended to write. Actually, I wanted to address Jason because I realized we're getting a little bit late too. I wanted to address Jason. So it's interesting, Jason. They don't talk about it much, especially during Thrawn's time. But if you read the Timothy Zahn series from a few years ago, which started with, I'll have to go back and look at the titles. It's about not the most current series, but the Timothy Zahn series a few years ago, where we see Thrawn first come into the Empire. The Empire is 100% xenophobic. They hate aliens. They use the term alien constantly, and it's a complete surprise to most people that Thrawn is even able to make his way through the ranks at all. He's a favorite of the emperors, and he befriends people, but there are people in there constantly trying to prevent him from succeeding and moving forward at every single turn. So it's actually fascinating that you say that, because you're right, we don't see it much, because in the movies and things, we see all kinds of people in the races. But if you notice, what you don't see in any of the movies in the Empire, you don't see what they would call aliens. You don't see a Thalothian, or you don't see an Aqualish, or you don't see these other races in Imperial clothing serving on a ship. You see humans. You only ever see humans. Thrawn is the only exception to that. That's your telling point right there.
Yeah, again, I like that. We've talked about how Star Wars and Star Trek's future is likely in its past. It's finding characters or eras that they've underdeveloped. I'm going to call out that comment right there. That is by Christopher Noyes, who is a friend of mine I have not talked to in a long time. And I'm so excited to see this because, and I know that we're like way over time. I don't know how long Chris has been watching this show. I hope he's watched the whole show, because I'm going to say something that is what is magical about both of these properties, Star Trek and Star Wars. Chris Noyes is a guy that I met in high school. I haven't talked to Chris in a long time. He was in my wedding. He is one of my closest and dearest friends. And I am so excited to see him on the list here. Oh, hey, and by the way, I can't wait to have, I'm sorry, Amy. I would love to have her back to talk to her about the episode of Enterprise she was on, and then that she was a Vulcan teacher and of Gods and Men. Oh my gosh, it'd be great to have her. I could like pick her brain all evening. But to get to Chris, Chris is a friend that I was able to make because of these two properties. And that's actually one of the best parts about Star Trek and Star Wars, is that you might have one that you love more than another, but man, if these communities aren't ones that you can just like build great friendships with.
I mean, it's how we came to do this together. I mean, it's exactly how I had started doing, just some background for everyone. I had started doing this as like a couple live streams I had done once or twice. Like, I kind of want to do some Star Wars stuff. And then after a bit, I'm like, okay, after a couple episodes, I'm like, it's fine, but it's not that much fun by myself. And then I had just started working in a new role. Ryan and I had met several times before, but we just started getting to work together. I had said, would you like to be on a show with me once? He's like, yes. We did it. I'm like, I told my wife afterward, this guy's going to be on here more. Like, this is awesome. And then shortly after, I'm like, dude, you just want to be on the show all the time? He's like, yes, okay. And to your point, like, this community turned into, like, you and me meeting this way turned into a show that I have to look at so many episodes right now, but it's probably close to 50, if not more. And a group of people that show up every week. Rich here all the time talking about giving us jibes about Star Trek, which led to this episode. I mean,
what led to this whole episode, because right. I can't go an episode not talking about Star Trek.
I don't know if Rich is still on right now, but yes. Rich, you need to comment and tell everybody. Are you keeping track for us? How many times?
But I mean, in all honesty, see, Chris is calling out the fact, Chris and I have great memories with Chris for both of these properties. Star Trek, I had never been to like a Star Trek convention. I never knew what that was going to be like, which is now like a comic book convention, which now I know is like a comic book convention. And I will say that Chris and I, like Chris, we went to I went to a Star Trek adventure with Chris. It was like one of the coolest experiences ever. I didn't know that there was like a whole community of people out there that loved this stuff. And LeVar Burton came out on stage, and I'm like a huge Reading Rainbow fan. So like, LeVar Burton was like a hero, and to have that guy show up, and we have his signature. I don't know if Chris still has his, but I have mine. And I loved meeting LeVar Burton. I loved that whole experience, and that was Star Trek, and it was right before Star Trek Generations came out. Yes, we met LeVar. And then Star Wars, Chris called out that we camped overnight to get our tickets for episode 1. We didn't need to, but we did it. And we had a whole group of people that we were out there to make sure that we could get that ticket. And then Star Wars Episode 1 came out on May 19th. And we watched the midnight showing, and it just happens my birthday's on May 18th. And Chris might remember this. The entire theater sang me happy birthday. This is still one of my like top tier moments, you know? And I just can't say enough that it's each one of these things has its pros and its cons. Star Trek has its greatest moments and its lowest moments, Star Trek 5. And Star Wars has its greatest moments and its lowest moments, Caravan of Courage. The
holiday special.
The holiday special. But in all of these, they have played such like an intrinsic part of my life that I have built friendships around. I have had these amazing life experiences around. Sharing them with my own children has been like something like wildly special. So yeah, like I'm gonna say this: it's not a versus story for me. It's an and story.
It is.
I'm Star Trek and Star Wars.
Yep. I've got my 6-year-old periodically watching The Mandalorian with me. He asks so many questions that it's really hard to get through any one episode. But he's got a little baby Grogu now that he likes to carry around the house. It's these things they bring us all together. And yes, we've talked about this. There's a dark side to all of it as well, because there always is. And there's toxicity in our city that does exist. Sorry, there's a little system of the down quote there. There's always, a dark side to these things. There always is. But I would say by and large, the communities are amazing. The fandom is amazing. Yeah. They cross over with each other. You can love both, and you should, because they're different and they're wonderful. And hell, that's why we're here. That's exactly why we do this show, why we like to have all of you on too. Yeah.
I feel like, one, I know we've gone over a half hour, our normal time. And two, I feel like I've been yelling this whole time. I'm so sorry to anyone that's been listening. I feel like I have been yelling the entire time. This has been like my favorite.
This is like your Sam Kinison night.
Oh my gosh. I mean, to talk about these two things that I love so much. It's been great. Like I every week we get to come on here and talk about something new with Star Wars, and I love it. Like I loved when we did the reviews of Boba Fett. I hope everybody comes back to listen when we do the weekly reviews for Obi-Wan. I know that we're planning an episode around what we hope is going to be in the Obi-Wan show and what we hope isn't going to be in the Obi-Wan show. And I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, and in addition to that, for everybody watching, we're both of the things that Ryan just talked about between now and when the Obi-Wan show comes out. We're also looking at ways to do potentially a watch party for the Obi-Wan, live watch party to broadcast that and do commentary and things like that. So if anyone's interested, stay tuned to the website, or no website, YouTube, Twitter, everywhere. We'll get it posted. But we are absolutely trying to do a watch party of some kind when it comes out live, and do commentary and just have a really good time with it. Get some popcorn, social lubricant, have a good time. Awesome. Well, listen, dude, it has been fantastic. I know we could just keep on doing this, and everybody who's been here tonight with us and been super interactive. Yes. This is Rich and Nick and Christopher and Amy when she was here, and Duke earlier, and just
oh my gosh,
Derek just joined. Oh, Derek, you've been here too, dude. Thank you for being here too.
This has been great.
And you know what? I have to shout out quick before we drop. Big shout out to Derek right here. Derek just did his first live stream the other day. We've been having conversations back and forth. He got inspired on his own. He did his first live stream for his business, and we've been talking over email. We're going to catch up here soon. But dude, congratulations doing your first live stream,
Oh
man.
man,
That's awesome.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Cool.
It's always great when we get to welcome someone coming out and building their own show.
Exactly. That's awesome.
But yeah, I just want to join you, everybody that's been on the show tonight, and thanks for all the interaction. It's been so great to hear all these comments. By the way, there's a question out there: Ewoks or Tribbles? I'm Tribbles all the way. Klingons hate Tribbles. That's hilarious. So I am 100% on board with Tribbles, and it's just so great to see Chris again. But all of these comments, man, I can't wait to hear everybody's feedback for another fandom that you'd like us to tackle in this time between now and Obi-Wan. Jeff brought up Lord of the Rings, especially with the Rings of Power show coming out on Amazon. I think we can probably talk a lot about what they should be trying to do, what they might want to learn from like Disney and even the Star Trek online series that have come out. So if you're interested in that, leave a comment. Let us know if there's another fandom. If you want Jeff to watch all of Battlestar Galactica, this is your chance to call that out.
Is this like a dunk tank?
Yes.
Call it out.
Yes. You got it. If you want Jeff to watch Battlestar Galactica, and then we'll come in here and we'll talk all about my theories about Battlestar Galactica in the future, and how Ronald D. Moore is a generational talent. Like we're gonna have a good time.
We'll do it. I will do it for all of you.
It's been a pleasure.
I will do it for all of you. By the way, Nick, the question is not Ewoks versus Tribbles. It's Porgs versus Tribbles, dude. Come on. Anyway, we're gonna bounce. Thank you all so much for sticking with us. Buck Rogers in the 21st century. Okay, we gotta go. All right, everyone. Have a good night.
Everybody.
We'll see you soon.
Thank you. Hey, take it easy.